Somebody, help me! Please! The desperate scream echoed off the concrete walls of the deserted parking garage, followed by the nervous tap of expensive heels, a low chuckle from the shadows, and the slide of a knife being drawn. The woman in the tailored business suit, Olivia Harrington, was trapped. 5 figures emerged from the gloom, blocking the only exit, their intentions clear and brutal in the dim, flickering light. One of them lunged, grabbing her arm. She cried out, a sharp gasp of fear that was swallowed by the silence. But the silence was immediately broken. "That's far enough." The voice was quiet, yet it cut through the tension like a razor. It came from the direction of the service elevator, where a man in a simple janitor's uniform stood holding a mop. The lead attacker, a burly man with a jagged scar across his eyebrow, sneered. "Look at this. A hero with a mop. Get lost, old man, before you get hurt." The janitor, Arthur Harris, didn't move. He took one step forward, the mop handle held like a staff. His eyes, dark and unreadable, scanned the 5 men, noting their positions, their stances, the glint of the knife in the leader's hand. He wasn't looking at them as a janitor would. He was assessing threats, calculating trajectories, identifying weaknesses. The leader gestured with his head. "Get him." When 2 of the men rushed him, Arthur moved with a blur of speed that defied his simple appearance. He didn't engage in a brawl. His movements were economical, precise, and devastatingly effective. He used the mop not as a clumsy club, but as an extension of his own body. As the first man threw a wild punch, Arthur sidestepped, letting the man's momentum carry him past. He brought the wet end of the mop up in a short, sharp arc, slapping it across the man's face. The dirty water and cleaning solution stung his eyes, and the man recoiled, momentarily blinded and sputtering. The second attacker came at him from the side, aiming a kick. Arthur pivoted, blocking the kick with the thick wooden handle of the mop. The impact sent a painful vibration up the attacker's leg. Before the man could recover, Arthur spun the mop, hooking the handle behind the man's knee and pulling sharply. The man's leg buckled, and he crashed to the concrete with a cry of pain. There was a sharp crack of wood against bone, a grunt of pain, and suddenly 2 of them were on the ground. The leader, stunned by the janitor's impossible efficiency, tightened his grip on Olivia's arm, pulling her back as a shield. The remaining 2 thugs hesitated, their overconfidence vanishing. Arthur's eyes narrowed and his voice dropped, becoming something cold, ancient, and absolutely lethal. "Don't touch her." The words hung in the air, a command, not a plea. Enraged, the third attacker charged, pulling a small crowbar from his jacket. He swung it wildly at Arthur's head. Arthur ducked under the swing, the metal bar whistling inches from his hair. He drove the end of the mop handle hard into the man's stomach, forcing the air from his lungs in a pained gasp. As the man doubled over, Arthur brought his knee up, connecting sharply with his chin. The man's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The final thug, seeing his friends dispatched with such brutal ease, lost his nerve. He glanced at his leader, then at the exit, and made his choice. He turned and fled into the darkness of the parking garage. Now only the leader remained, his knife held unsteadily, his arm still clamped around Olivia. His face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "Who the hell are you?" he snarled, pulling Olivia tighter. Arthur didn't answer. He started walking forward, his steps slow and deliberate. The mop was gone, dropped to the side. His hands were open, relaxed, yet they looked more dangerous than any weapon. The leader panicked. He shoved Olivia forward, hoping to create a distraction, and lunged with the knife. Arthur's reaction was instantaneous. He deflected Olivia's body to the side with one arm, shielding her, while his other hand shot out, catching the leader's knife wrist in an iron grip. He twisted. The man yelped as bones grated, and the knife clattered to the floor. At the same time, the man's free hand clawed at Arthur's uniform. tearing the thin fabric of his work shirt from the collar down to his sternum. For a split second, under the flickering fluorescent light, a shape was revealed. Inked onto the skin over Arthur's heart was a fiercely detailed eagle, its wings spread wide as if in mid-flight, its eyes sharp and predatory. Olivia gasped. Her fear, the adrenaline, the shock of the attack, it all vanished, replaced by a single, impossible image burned into her memory. That tattoo. With a final, decisive movement, Arthur slammed the heel of his palm into the leader's nose. There was a sickening crunch, and the man collapsed, moaning in a heap on the ground. The garage fell into a sudden, ringing silence, broken only by the groans of the defeated men and Olivia's ragged breathing. Arthur stood over them, his chest rising and falling, the torn shirt hanging open. His focus was already shifting, his senses on high alert for any further threats. He had to get out of there. He had to get back to Maya. But he was too late. That tattoo? Olivia's voice was a choked whisper, trembling but clear. I've seen it before. Arthur froze. He slowly turned to face her, his expression guarded, his body tense. He had been so careful for 7 years. He had built a life of invisibility, of quiet anonymity. In 30 seconds of violence, it was all threatening to unravel. Olivia took a hesitant step forward, her eyes locked on the eagle on his chest. Her own heart was pounding, but for a different reason now. Her mind raced back 7 years, to another day of chaos and violence, to a man who had stood between her and death. A man who had worn that exact same symbol. My father's bodyguard, she breathed, her voice filled with a dawning, terrifying realization. The one who... They said you were dead. Arthur's blood ran cold. The name on his work uniform, the carefully constructed identity he had lived under for 7 years, felt like a paper-thin costume about to be incinerated. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. The haunted look in Olivia Harrington's eyes and the frantic pounding in his own chest. You're mistaken, he said, his voice flat and hard. It was a reflex, a line rehearsed in 1,000 nightmares. He took a step back, pulling the torn edges of his shirt together to cover the tattoo. My name is Arthur Harris. I'm the janitor. That's all, a janitor who moves like that? Olivia challenged, her voice gaining strength. She gestured to the 5 groaning men scattered across the concrete floor. A janitor with the exact same tattoo as a man who died saving my father. Don't lie to me. His mind was racing. He needed to leave. The police would be on their way. Someone must have heard the commotion or Olivia's scream. His prints would be all over the scene, and the name Arthur Harris wouldn't stand up to serious scrutiny. But Olivia stood in his path, her expression a mixture of shock, fear, and something else, a fierce, desperate need for answers. As if summoned by his thoughts, the distant wail of a siren pierced the air, growing closer with each passing second. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through Arthur. He glanced toward the garage exit, then back at Olivia. We have to go. Now. Not until you tell me who you are, she insisted, standing her ground. There's no time, he hissed, his trained instincts screaming at him. The police will be here in less a minute. Do you want to explain this? He swept his hand toward the unconscious bodies. For the first time, Olivia's composure wavered. She looked at the men, then back at Arthur. He was right. A bloody scene, a mysterious janitor who fought like a trained killer. It would be a media circus and a legal nightmare. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company in the middle of a hostile takeover. She couldn't afford a scandal. This way, she said, making a split-second decision. She turned and strode toward a plain, unmarked steel door at the far end of the garage. One Arthur had always assumed was a utility closet. She pressed her thumb against a tiny, almost invisible panel beside the frame. A green light blinked, and a heavy lock clicked open. This is a private elevator. It goes directly to my penthouse. Come on. Arthur hesitated for only a fraction of a second. It was a trap, another complication, but it was also the only viable escape. With one last look at the carnage, he followed her into the elevator, the steel door closing behind them with a heavy, final thud, shutting out the sound of the approaching sirens. The elevator was silent and moved with unnerving speed. The air inside was thick with unspoken questions. Arthur stood rigidly in the corner, his mind a whirlwind. He was compromised. The life he had built for Maya was in jeopardy. Olivia stood opposite him, her arms crossed, her gaze intense and unwavering. She wasn't looking at him with fear anymore, but with a calculated scrutiny. The doors opened into a sprawling penthouse apartment that was more like an art gallery than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking panorama of the city lights. The space was minimalist, decorated in cool shades of gray and white, and impeccably clean. It was another world from the dusty service corridors and locker rooms Arthur inhabited. "Sit down," Olivia commanded, gesturing toward a sleek leather sofa. Arthur remained standing. "I can't stay. My daughter is waiting for me." "She'll have to wait a little longer," Olivia said, walking over to a wet bar and pouring 2 glasses of water with a hand that trembled only slightly. She handed one to him. He didn't take it. "The eagle tattoo," she began, her voice steady. "It was the emblem for the Aegis unit. My father's private security detail. It was highly classified. Only the best of the best. He told me it symbolized the promise to be a guardian, a protector who sees everything from above." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "There were 2 men on his detail with that tattoo 7 years ago. The first was Evan Cross. He was my father's friend. The second was a ghost, a legend even among the team. His name wasn't on any official roster. Both were reported killed in the ambush that took my father's life." Arthur's jaw tightened. Every word she spoke was a nail in the coffin of his old life. "Evan was older, blonde-haired," Olivia continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But the ghost? No one ever saw his face. He was just a shadow that kept my father safe. So I'll ask you again. Who are you?" "My name is Arthur Harris," he repeated, his voice a low growl. "I have a daughter to get home to." "Let me go." He turned to leave, but Olivia's next word stopped him cold. "Is her name Maya?" Arthur froze, his back to her. He slowly turned around, his face a mask of stone, but his eyes betrayed the shock. "How?" he breathed. "When you first started working here 6 months ago, all employees underwent a standard background check," Olivia explained, her mind clearly piecing things together. "Yours came back clean, almost too clean. Arthur Harris, born in a small town that barely exists, no living relatives, but there was one attachment, a dependent, an 8-year-old daughter named Maya. When I saw it, the name stuck with me. Evan, his own daughter, was named Maya." A wave of dizziness washed over Arthur. Evan Cross, his partner, his best friend, the man who had died in his arms, the man whose daughter he had sworn to protect as his own. Before he could process the revelation, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. The screen read, "Mrs. Gable, Maya's babysitter." He looked from the phone to Olivia, a new kind of desperation in his eyes. The game was over. The lies had run out. He was trapped between the ghosts of his past and the terrified screams of his present. "I have to answer this," he said, his voice raw. Olivia simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She knew she had him. The ghost was finally cornered. Arthur's thumb hovered over the screen, the cheerful photo of Maya he used as a background mocking the grim reality of the situation. He felt Olivia's eyes on him, dissecting his every move. He finally swiped to answer, turning away from her slightly as if to shield the conversation from her intense gaze. "Mrs. Gable," he said, forcing a calm he was far from feeling. "Is everything all right?" "Oh, Arthur, yes, dear, everything is fine," the elderly woman's voice chirped through the speaker. "Maya is fast asleep. I was just calling because you're usually home by now. Didn't want you to worry." "Got held up at work," he replied, the lie tasting like ash. A spill on the executive floor. I'm on my way now. I shouldn't be more than 30 minutes. All right, dear. Drive safe. Maya left one of her drawings on the table for you. A lion with a big fuzzy mane. A lump formed in Arthur's throat. A lion. His little girl always drew him as a lion, her fierce protector. I'll look at it as soon as I get home. Thank you, Helen. For everything, he ended the call and stood in silence, the weight of his double life pressing down on him. She's Evan's daughter, isn't she? Olivia's voice was soft, not an accusation, but a statement of fact. Arthur slowly turned to face her. The fight was gone from his eyes, replaced by a weariness that seemed to settle into his bones. He gave a single sharp nod. Her name is Maya Cross. Evan was my partner. He was my brother. The admission hung in the air between them, heavy and irrevocable. The janitor persona dissolved completely, leaving behind the ghost Olivia had recognized. What happened that day? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The reports were all redacted. They said it was a random terrorist attack, but it wasn't, was it? Arthur walked over to the vast window, staring down at the city lights but seeing only the fire and smoke of 7 years ago. It was a setup, he said, his voice low and gravelly. We were betrayed. Someone on the inside sold your father's route and our security protocols to the highest bidder. They weren't there to kidnap him. It was an assassination. He recounted the events in clipped, precise sentences, devoid of emotion, like a field agent delivering a debrief. The first explosion that disabled their vehicle. The coordinated ambush. Evan, throwing himself in front of Olivia's father, taking a burst of automatic fire meant for him. Evan died in my arms, Arthur said, his gaze distant. His last words were a promise I made to him. Take care of my Maya, don't let them find her. And my father? Olivia asked, her own hands clenched tightly. He didn't make it. I got him to a secondary extraction point, but he was wounded. He died before the med team arrived. I was hit too. He unconsciously touched a spot on his side, where a network of old scars lay hidden beneath his uniform. The official report listed 2 bodies from the Aegis unit. Evan and a second operative, burned beyond recognition. That was supposed to be me. I used the chaos to disappear. It was the only way to keep my promise. The people who wanted your father dead were powerful. If they knew I survived, they'd hunt me down, and they would use Maya to get to me. Olivia sank into one of the chairs, the story confirming her deepest fears. Her father's death wasn't random. It was a conspiracy. For 7 years, she had run Harrington Industries under the shadow of that lie. And now the man who held the truth was standing in her living room, mopping her company's floors. He had sacrificed his life, his identity, everything, to protect his friend's child. A new respect began to replace her shock. This man wasn't just a ghost. He was a guardian. They were connected, not just by the shared trauma of that day, but by the legacy of the men they had both lost. Arthur, she began, the name feeling more real on her lips now. Before she could finish, her phone, sitting on the marble coffee table, buzzed with an incoming message. She glanced down at it, her brow furrowing at the unknown number. She tapped the screen to open it. Her face went pale. What is it? Arthur asked, noticing the immediate shift in her demeanor. Wordlessly, she turned the phone toward him. It was a photograph, clear and high resolution, taken from across the street. It showed the front entrance of his modest apartment building. The timestamp in the corner was from 2 minutes ago. Below the image was a short, chilling line of text. Your janitor missed a spot. We can clean it up for you. Or you can sell the company to Mr. Winslow. You have 24 hours. The air was sucked from Arthur's lungs. It was happening. The nightmare he had run from for 7 years was here. They hadn't just found him. They were watching his home. They were watching Maya. He looked up from the phone, and the weary, defeated man was gone. In his place was the ghost from the garage, the lethal operative, his eyes burning with the cold, absolute fury of a cornered lion whose cub had just been threatened. Primal instinct roared to life inside Arthur. The carefully constructed walls of his quiet, civilian life didn't just crack. They vaporized. All that remained was the operative, the protector, and the singular, overwhelming mission objective. Get to Maya. He lunged for the door, his mind already mapping the fastest route back to his apartment, calculating response times, planning for a violent confrontation. "Stop!" Olivia's voice was sharp, cutting through his panicked haze. She moved to block his path, her body radiating an authority that, for the first time, matched his own physical intensity. "Get out of my way," Arthur snarled, his eyes dark with a dangerous light. "They're watching my daughter." "I'm not going to stand here and wait." "And do what?" She shot back, her gaze unflinching. "Run into a trap." "They sent that message for a reason, Arthur. They want you to run home. They're waiting for you. If you go storming in there, you'll either get yourself killed or you'll lead them right to her. You'll be no good to Maya dead." Her words were like a splash of ice water, logical and brutally correct. He froze, his hand on the doorknob, the warrior's blind rage giving way to the cold dread of a strategist. She was right. This wasn't a street fight. It was a calculated move in a much larger game. His carelessness could get Maya killed. He backed away from the door, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He felt powerless, trapped in a glass tower while his daughter slept in the crosshairs of an assassin. "What do we do?" he asked, the question raw and torn from his throat. Olivia's CEO demeanor took over. The shock and fear were compartmentalized, replaced by a focused, commanding presence. "We get her out," she said simply. "But we do it my way." "We do it smartly." She walked over to a sleek, minimalist desk and tapped a button on an intercom. "Zane, I need you on my private line. Now. Priority 1. A moment later, her desk phone chimed. She put it on speaker. "Zane, I'm sending you an image of a residential building. I need a complete surveillance overview of the block, effective immediately. Traffic cams, satellite, any assets you have on the ground. I want to know about every vehicle, every person on a rooftop, every shadow that looks out of place. I need to see who is watching this building." A calm, professional voice with a faint European accent responded without hesitation. "Understood, Ms. Harrington. Give me 10 minutes. "You have 5, Olivia said, and disconnected the call. She looked at Arthur. "My head of security, Zain al-Jamil, ex-Mossad. He's the best there is. If someone is watching your apartment, he'll find them." Arthur could only nod, stunned by the speed and efficiency with which she operated. In his old life, a request like that would have involved cutting through layers of red tape. For Olivia, it was a simple phone call. He had the skills to fight the war, but she had the arsenal. The 5 minutes that followed were the longest of Arthur's life. He paced the length of the penthouse like a caged tiger, unable to stand still. Every tick of the clock was a hammer blow against his sanity. Olivia stood by the window, watching him, her expression a complex mix of concern and calculation. "This is my fault," Arthur said, finally stopping to stare out at the city. "For 7 years I kept her safe. I was so careful. I became a ghost, left no trail, but I got complacent. I should have seen this coming." "This isn't your fault," Olivia replied, her voice firm. "This is Barrett Winslow. He's been trying to dismantle my father's legacy since the day he died. He sees the company as a prize, and he'll crush anyone who gets in his way. You just became a pawn in his game." She turned from the window to face him. "He made a mistake, though. He threatened the wrong person's child. And he has no idea who he's dealing with." Her phone chimed again. It was Zane. "Talk to me," Olivia commanded. "Ma'am, we have a problem." Zane's voice was as calm as before, but laced with a new urgency. "It's a professional setup. There are 2 surveillance teams. The first is textbook, a gray utility van parked across the street. 2 men inside, thermal imaging, listening devices aimed at the 3rd floor. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. The 3rd floor. Maya's bedroom was at the front of the apartment. "What's the second team?" Olivia asked, her voice tight. There was a brief pause on the line. "It's a kill team, ma'am." "Not just surveillance. I've got a confirmed sniper. He's on the rooftop of the office building directly opposite yours. High-powered rifle, night vision scope. He has a clear line of sight to every window on the front of your building." Zane's voice was grim. "They aren't just watching. They're waiting for a target." The word sniper hung in the air of the pristine penthouse, a venomous, lethal sound that desecrated the sterile quiet. For a heartbeat, Arthur couldn't breathe. His mind conjured a horrifying image. A red laser dot dancing on the wall above Maya's bed. The fury from moments before evaporated, replaced by an icy, paralyzing dread. It was Olivia who broke the silence, her voice devoid of panic, sharpened to a razor's edge. "Zane, what's his field of fire? Can he see the back of the building from that position?" "Negative," Zane's voice crackled back. "His current perch only gives him a clean shot at the front and side exposures. But if he repositions to the western edge of the roof, he could have the alley in his sights in under 90 seconds. Arthur's mind snapped back into focus. He was the man on the ground, the expert on the terrain. "My apartment has a kitchen window that opens onto a fire escape," he said, his voice clipped and rapid. "It leads down into the service alley behind the building." "Too predictable," Zane countered immediately. "The van will have motion sensors and possibly a camera covering the alley. The moment that fire escape is used, they'll know. And they'll radio the sniper to reposition, so we give them something else to look at," Olivia stated, her mind already working angles, deploying resources like a general moving pieces on a battlefield. "A bigger threat. Zane, what's the address of the building directly to the east of Arthur's?" Zane recited the address instantly. Olivia was already dialing a new number on her phone, pulling up a specific contact. "Arthur," she said, her eyes meeting his, "I'm going to create a diversion. It will be loud, chaotic, and it will draw every eye on that street. When it happens, you will have a very small window to get your daughter out. You'll have to call Mrs. Gable. Can you get her to follow your instructions without panicking?" Arthur's jaw was a hard line. "I can." "Good." Olivia's call connected. She altered her voice, making it slightly higher-pitched, frantic. "Yes, hello? I need to report a major gas leak. I was walking my dog past 415 Grant Street, and the smell is overwhelming. My cousin is a plumber, and he said it sounds like a main line is about to go. You need to send everyone you have right now." She rattled off the address Zane had given her and hung up before they could ask any questions. "Zane, have your extraction team ready," she commanded into her desk phone. "I want a 2-man paramedic team and an ambulance at the north end of the service alley in 4 minutes. No sirens, no lights." "They are already en route, Miss Harrington," Zane confirmed. The pieces were in motion. Arthur pulled out his phone, his thumb shaking as he found Mrs. Gable's number. He took a deep, steadying breath. He had to be calm. His panic would travel through the phone and infect her. "Zane, give me a countdown," Olivia ordered. "First emergency vehicles ETA, 2 minutes." Arthur hit dial. It rang twice. "Arthur?" Mrs. Gable's voice was warm and sleepy. "Helen, listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and even. "There is a fire in the building next door. In about 1 minute, the alarms for our building are going to go off as a precaution. I need you to do exactly as I say. Do not panic, oh heavens. A fire? We're going to be fine, but we have to move now. I need you to go into Maya's room. Wake her up, but do it gently. Tell her we're playing a game, a surprise camping trip. Wrap her in the thickest blanket you can find. Do not get her dressed. Do not pack anything, just the blanket. Do you understand?" "A game. Yes, Arthur, I understand." He could hear the resolve in her voice replacing the fear. "Good. Now take her to the kitchen. The window over the sink leads to the fire escape. I need you to take her down the ladder. At the bottom of the alley there will be 2 paramedics waiting for you. They will say the code word, lion. Give Maya to them. They will bring her to me. Okay, Arthur. The fire escape, the paramedics." Lion. She was repeating it, locking it in. "1 minute, Miss Harrington," Zane's voice announced from the speakerphone. The distant wail of sirens began to creep into the penthouse. "Helen, you have to go now. I love you both," Arthur said, his voice cracking on the last word. He hung up. The next 60 seconds were an eternity. Arthur and Olivia stood frozen, listening to the approaching sirens grow into a deafening roar. "Fire trucks are on the scene," Zane reported. "They're blocking the street. The van is blind. The sniper is looking at the commotion. He's focused on the fire trucks. Stand by." A tense silence stretched. Arthur held his breath, imagining Mrs. Gable's slow, careful steps on the cold iron rungs of the fire escape. Maya bundled in her arms. "I have visual," Zane said, a note of relief in his voice. "2 figures are at the bottom of the escape. My team is moving in. They have the package. They're moving to the ambulance." Arthur felt his knees go weak with relief. He gripped the back of the sofa to steady himself. They'd done it. But then Zane's voice changed, losing its calm, professional tone and becoming sharp with alarm. "Wait. Hold on. The sniper, he's turning away from the fire. Something spooked him. He's turning back toward the building. He spotted them in the alley. He's raising his rifle. Get down! Sniper, sniper!" Zane's voice exploded from the speakerphone, a desperate, raw command that ripped through the penthouse. Arthur felt the words like a physical blow, his entire body tensing for an impact he couldn't see. He stared at the phone, his imagination painting a scene of pure horror in the dark alley below. A split second later, the sharp, unmistakable crack of a high-velocity rifle shot echoed faintly through the thick glass of the penthouse windows. Arthur's world dissolved into a roaring void. He was no longer in the penthouse. He was back in the dust and fire of that final mission, the scent of gunpowder in his nostrils, the weight of his dying friend in his arms. He let out a guttural sound of pure anguish, lurching forward as if he could somehow physically intervene from 40 stories up. Olivia grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong, anchoring him to the present. "Zane, report!" she yelled at the phone, her voice strained but still in command. For a torturous second, there was only static. Then Zane's voice came through, breathless and adrenaline-fueled. "We're hit! One of my men is down. But the package is secure. I repeat, the package is secure. They're in the ambulance. Go! Go! Go!" Through the open line, they could hear the squeal of tires as the ambulance tore out of the alley, its own sirens now joining the chaotic symphony rising from the street. Arthur stood rigid, listening, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The package. Maya. "Zane, is she okay?" Arthur's voice was a choked rasp. "Is Maya okay?" "The girl is fine," Zane reported, his breathing still heavy. "My operative Dan, he shielded them. Took the round in his shoulder. He's conscious, but he's bleeding. They're en route to the private medical facility now. The older woman is in shock, but unharmed. They're safe, Arthur. They're away." The relief that washed over Arthur was so immense it almost buckled his knees. Maya was safe, but the relief was immediately consumed by a wave of incandescent rage. It was a cold, precise fury, unlike the blind panic from before. This was the fury of a predator whose territory had been invaded, whose young had been threatened. The line had been crossed. He looked at Olivia, and she saw the transformation in his eyes. The haunted janitor, the desperate father, both were gone. The man standing before her now was the ghost she'd heard stories about, a weapon given human form. "He tried to kill my daughter," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He shot one of your men to do it. This ends." Tonight, Olivia's face was pale, but her eyes held a fire that matched his. An innocent man, her employee, was now on his way to an operating table because of her. Barrett Winslow hadn't just attacked her company. He had brought a war to her doorstep and wounded one of her own. "He won't get away with this," she said, her voice trembling with a controlled anger. "My father built Harrington Industries on strength and integrity. I will not let a monster like Barrett Winslow drag his name through the mud and spill blood to get what he wants." Their shared purpose solidified in that moment, forging their fragile truce into a hardened alliance. The hunt was on. Men like Winslow are insulated, Arthur said, his tactical mind already processing, formulating a plan. He'll have layers of plausible deniability. We can't just go to the police. We need leverage. We need one of the men who was on the ground. The sniper will be a ghost by now, Olivia reasoned, catching on immediately. Untraceable. Exactly, Arthur agreed. He was the professional, but the team in the van, they're amateurs. Hired muscle. They're the weak link. They're trackable, and they're breakable. Zane, he said, turning to the phone. The van. Do you still have eyes on it? They're panicked, Zane reported. They pulled out of the area 2 minutes ago, heading south on the interstate. They're driving erratically. I'm tracking them via a traffic drone. They aren't professionals, Arthur. You're right. Give me the location. I'm going after them, Arthur declared. He started for the door again, but this time with the cold purpose of a hunter, not the desperation of a father. What are you going to do? Olivia asked, moving to intercept him. I'm going to have a conversation, Arthur said, his eyes like chips of flint. And I'm going to get the name of the man who hired them. You can't go alone, she insisted. It's too dangerous. I work alone, he stated flatly. It's safer that way. For everyone, not anymore, Olivia countered, stepping directly in his path. She would not be dismissed. My name is on that threat from Winslow. My employee is in an operating room. My father's legacy is on the line. This is my war too. You have the skills, but I have the resources to back you up. You need me, and I need you. We do this together. Arthur stared at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He saw the same unshakable resolve that had likely made her father a titan of industry. She wasn't afraid. She was angry, and she wasn't asking for permission. He gave a slow, reluctant nod. Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No arguments. Olivia nodded, her expression grim but resolute. Understood. There was no time to waste. While Olivia grabbed a set of keys and a slim, encrypted tablet from a wall safe, Arthur began to improvise. He was a ghost, a man without an arsenal. He had to find his weapons in the world around him. He took a heavy, solid brass letter opener from Olivia's desk, its point sharp, and its handle a perfect fit for his palm. From the penthouse's utility closet, he retrieved a small, dense fire extinguisher and a roll of thick, industrial zip ties. It wasn't much, but in his hands, everyday objects became tools of devastating potential. This way, Olivia said, leading him back to the private elevator. My personal garage. The car isn't registered to me or the company. The car was a deceptively plain, dark gray sedan. Arthur noted with approval that it was a performance model, its engine humming with a low, powerful thrum when Olivia started it. He got into the driver's seat without asking. Put the tablet on the dashboard, he instructed as he pulled out of the garage into the city's quiet, late-night streets. Zane is still tracking them? He's patched into the car's system, Olivia confirmed, her fingers flying across the tablet's screen. A map of the city appeared, a single red dot blinking as it moved south. They're heading for the old docklands. The industrial sector by the river. Arthur's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He drove with an unnerving calm, his movements fluid and efficient as he weaved through the sparse traffic, his eyes constantly scanning mirrors, alleyways, and rooftops. This was his world. For 7 years he had suppressed it, but the instincts were as sharp as ever. When we get there, you stay in the car, he said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. You lock the doors. You do not get out, no matter what you see or hear. Is that clear? And if something goes wrong, she challenged, then you drive away and you don't look back, he said without a hint of hesitation. You go back to that medical facility and you take Maya, and you disappear. Zane will help you. Olivia fell silent, the cold finality in his voice chilling her. This wasn't a game. She was sitting next to a man who was fully prepared to die to keep his promise. She watched his profile, the hard set of his jaw, the intense focus in his eyes. This was the man Evan Cross had trusted with his daughter's life. "They're exiting," she announced, her voice all business again. "Taking the shipyard access road." "It's a dead end. Perfect," Arthur muttered. He killed the headlights and turned onto the same road, the sedan gliding through the darkness like a shark. Up ahead, they could see the van, parked haphazardly near a row of rusting shipping containers. A lone light was on inside. Arthur pulled the car to a stop 200 feet away, parking behind a large dumpster that concealed them from view. He killed the engine, and the world went silent save for the sound of the wind whipping off the river. He picked up the fire extinguisher from the back seat. "Lock the doors," he said, and slipped out of the car, melting into the shadows. Olivia's heart hammered against her ribs. She could only watch, a helpless spectator, as Arthur moved with an eerie silence across the broken asphalt. He didn't run. He flowed through the darkness, using the shipping containers as cover. The back doors of the van suddenly swung open, and two men jumped out. They were nervous, arguing in hushed, angry tones. Arthur waited, patient as a predator. When one of the men walked a few feet away to relieve himself against a container, Arthur made his move. He emerged from the shadows behind the second man and swung the fire extinguisher in a short, brutal arc. It connected with the back of the man's knee with a sickening thud, and the man went down without a sound. Before the first man could even turn around, Arthur was on him, one hand clamped over his mouth, the other driving the sharp point of the letter opener against the soft flesh under his jaw. "Make a sound and you die," Arthur whispered in his ear. The man froze, trembling, the fight draining out of him instantly. Arthur zip-tied the man's hands and feet, then did the same to his unconscious partner. He dragged the conscious one behind the dumpster, back to the waiting car. He opened the passenger door and shoved the terrified man inside at Olivia's feet. "Drive," he ordered Olivia, getting in the back seat with their new captive. She drove them deeper into the maze of shipping containers, to a place where they were completely shielded from view. Arthur leaned forward, his face inches from the thugs. "You have one chance to talk to me," Arthur said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Who hired you?" "I don't know, man," the thug stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "The money was wired." The orders came through an encrypted app. Arthur pressed the point of the letter opener against the man's cheek, not enough to break the skin, but enough to make the threat undeniable. "That's the wrong answer." "Someone hired you. Someone gave you our pictures." "I want a name," the man whimpered, his eyes darting around in terror. "Look, I swear, I don't know who the big boss is. We just deal with the middleman. A guy named Petrov. Gregor Petrov. He's ex-Spetsnaz or something. A real psycho. He handles all of Winslow's wet work." Petrov. The name landed in the silence of the car. It was the link they needed. Just as Arthur was about to press for more information, a set of powerful headlights flooded their car, blinding them. A heavy black SUV, which had been waiting silently in the shadows a few rows over, roared to life. It sped directly toward them, its massive engine thundering through the docklands. "It's a trap!" Olivia yelled. The men in the van weren't the weak link. They were the bait, and Arthur had just walked them right into the jaws of the real hunters. There was no time to think, only to act. "Get down!" Arthur yelled, shoving Olivia's head below the dashboard as he simultaneously threw his own door open and kicked the terrified thug out onto the asphalt. He scrambled over the center console and seized the steering wheel, slamming the car into reverse. The sedan's tires screamed in protest, throwing up a shower of gravel as Arthur swerved backward, just as the black SUV roared past where they had been parked, its heavy bull bar missing them by inches. The SUV's driver was skilled, immediately braking and spinning the vehicle around to block the main exit from the container yard. They were boxed in. "Hold on!" Arthur shouted. He spun the wheel, aiming the nimble sedan not for the blocked exit, but deeper into the labyrinth of steel containers. The SUV, built for power and not agility, followed, its headlights cutting a terrifying swathe through the darkness. It was a brutal, claustrophobic chase. Arthur pushed the sedan to its limits, executing impossibly tight turns, the sides of the car scraping against corrugated steel with a sound like tearing metal. He could see the SUV in the rearview mirror, a relentless predator that took the turns wider but made up for it with raw, engine-screaming acceleration. He made a sharp right, then a quick left, trying to break the line of sight. But the SUV was always there, its driver anticipating his moves. On a short, straight path between two rows of containers, the SUV's engine roared, and it surged forward, ramming into the back of the sedan with a deafening crunch of impact. Olivia cried out as her head was thrown back against the seat. The sedan fishtailed wildly, the dashboard lighting up with warning signals. "Radiators hit," Arthur grunted, fighting for control of the wheel. "We're losing power." "We have to ditch the car up ahead." He saw it. A narrow gap between a tilted container and a concrete loading dock, a space far too small for the SUV to follow. It was their only chance. He aimed the dying car directly for the gap. "Get ready to run," he commanded. He floored the accelerator one last time, and the sedan shot forward, wedging itself into the gap with a final grinding shriek of metal. The airbags deployed with a violent hiss. Before the smoke had even cleared, Arthur had his door open. He reached over, unbuckled Olivia's seatbelt, and pulled her out of the passenger side. "This way, go!" They scrambled out of the wreckage and into the deep shadows of the docklands just as the SUV skidded to a halt behind their disabled car. 3 men in dark tactical gear jumped out. They were not the clumsy thugs from the van. These men moved with the fluid, silent efficiency of professional soldiers. They were armed with short-barreled rifles, and they immediately began to sweep the area in a coordinated, triangular search pattern. Arthur pulled Olivia behind a massive, discarded anchor, its rusted metal offering a small pocket of darkness. They were exposed, on foot, and being hunted by a team of trained killers. "Who are they?" Olivia whispered, her breathing ragged. "Petrov's men," Arthur said, his eyes tracking the beams of their weapon-mounted flashlights as they sliced through the night. "This is what they do." The hunt was methodical. The men didn't shout. They used quiet hand signals, moving from cover to cover. Their discipline absolute. Arthur knew they were outmatched. He had a letter opener and his bare hands. They had rifles. One of the hunters was getting closer, his flashlight beam methodically scanning the area around them. Arthur flattened himself and Olivia against the cold, damp concrete at the base of the anchor. He could hear the crunch of the man's boots on the gravel, each step a countdown to their discovery. The beam of light passed over them, sweeping just above their heads. Arthur could feel Olivia's body trembling beside him. He put a steadying hand on her shoulder, a silent command to stay absolutely still. The footsteps stopped. The beam of light froze, pointing at the container just beside their hiding spot. Had he heard them? Seen a reflection? Arthur's muscles coiled, ready to spring. He knew a direct confrontation would be suicide, but he would not be captured alive. Not when Maya's safety was on the line. After a heart-stopping eternity, the hunter moved on, his footsteps receding as he continued his sweep. They were safe, but only for a moment. They were trapped in a kill box, and the hunters were slowly, patiently, closing the net. They couldn't stay there. Arthur leaned in close, his lips brushing against Olivia's ear. His whisper was barely a breath of air. "They won't stop until they find us. I can't let them take you. You're the only one who can protect Maya if I'm gone." "What are you saying?" she whispered back, her eyes wide with fear in the gloom. "I'm going to draw them away," he said, his voice laced with a grim finality. "To the east, toward the river. It will give you a window. When you hear me, you run. Back the way we came. Don't stop for anything." "No," she immediately shot back, her whisper fierce and defiant. "Absolutely not. I'm not leaving you here." "That's an order," he said, his tone hard. "I don't take orders from you," she retorted, grabbing his arm. "We get out of this together, or we don't get out at all." The footsteps of one of the hunters began to circle back, getting closer once again. They were out of time. The crunch of boots on gravel grew louder, closer. They had seconds. "You'll slow me down," Arthur whispered, a final desperate attempt to force her to save herself. "You'll need a ride when this is over," Olivia shot back, her voice a low, fierce whisper. "I'm not leaving my partner in the field." The word partner struck Arthur with unexpected force. In the middle of this nightmare, hunted and cornered, she wasn't a liability to be protected. She was an ally, holding the line. He saw the unwavering steel in her eyes, and knew arguing was a waste of precious time. The approaching hunter was now just one container away. "Fine," he breathed, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. "Stay behind me. Don't make a sound." He peered through a gap between the anchor and a stack of pallets. His eyes, now fully adjusted to the darkness, scanned the industrial landscape. He wasn't just looking for cover anymore. He was looking for a weapon. And then he saw it. 50 feet away, a rusty gantry crane stood silent, its massive hook dangling over a loading platform. On that platform, held back by a single, rotting wooden chock, was a pyramid of heavy, corroded steel pipes. The platform was directly above the main path the hunters were using. It was a long shot, a desperate, dangerous gamble, but it was the only one they had. He turned to Olivia, his plan forming with lightning speed. "See that container, the blue one? I need you to get behind it. When I give you the signal, I need you to throw something, a rock, anything, at the container on the far side. Make a single, sharp noise. Just one." Olivia's eyes widened as she understood. "A diversion." She nodded, her face pale but determined. "My signal will be a bird call," he whispered. A low whistle, the call of a nighthawk he and Evan had used as a field sign for years. "The moment you hear it, make the noise and then stay down. Go!" She moved with a quiet swiftness that surprised him, disappearing behind the blue container. Arthur waited, counting the seconds, tracking the positions of the 3 flashlight beams. He saw his opening. He broke from cover, moving in a low crouch, a ghost flitting between shadows. He reached the ladder of the gantry crane and began to climb, his movements silent and sure. From his new vantage point 20 feet up, he had a clear view of the entire scene. He saw Olivia in position. He saw 2 of the hunters moving slowly down the main path below him. The third was circling around near Olivia's position. It was time. He put 2 fingers to his lips and let out the soft, 2-note whistle of a nighthawk. Almost instantly, a sharp tink echoed from the far side of the yard as Olivia's rock struck metal. The third hunter's head snapped in that direction. He paused, signaled to his comrades, and broke off to investigate the sound, his flashlight beam probing the darkness where Olivia had been. It worked. Now there were only 2. Arthur scrambled onto the loading platform. The steel pipes were massive, each one weighing several hundred pounds. The wooden chock holding them in place was splintered and damp with decay. He pulled the heavy brass letter opener from his pocket. It wasn't much of a lever, but it would have to do. Below him, the 2 remaining hunters advanced, their rifles held at the ready. Their path would take them directly under the platform. Arthur lay flat on his stomach, jamming the point of the letter opener into a crack in the rotting wood. He began to pry. Wood groaned. Splinters flew. The hunters stopped, looking up. Had they heard him? Arthur froze, his heart in his throat. But they seemed to dismiss the sound as the wind groaning through the derelict shipyard. They continued forward. They were now directly underneath him. With a final, desperate heave, Arthur put all his weight on the letter opener. The wooden chock shattered with a loud crack. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a low groan, the entire stack of pipes began to shift. They rolled off the edge of the platform and crashed down onto the path below, with the sound of a bomb going off, a deafening explosion of metal on concrete. A cloud of rust and dust erupted from the point of impact. One of the hunters was buried completely. The other was struck by the edge of the pile, his leg crushed, his scream of agony sharp and brief before he was knocked unconscious. The third hunter, hearing the crash, spun around and sprinted back. He saw the devastation and his two downed comrades. Then he saw Arthur, a silhouette against the dim sky, dropping down from the crane. The hunter raised his rifle, but Arthur was already moving. He landed on his feet and charged, closing the distance before the man could get a clean shot. The hunter fired a wild burst, the bullet sparking off a container behind Arthur's head. Arthur slammed into him, driving his shoulder hard into the man's chest. The rifle flew from his grasp. This man was a professional. He recovered instantly, pulling a combat knife from his belt. He lunged and Arthur sidestepped, but the blade still sliced a burning, white-hot line across his left forearm. Arthur ignored the pain, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting, using his momentum against him. They grappled in the darkness, a deadly, silent dance of blocks and strikes. The man was strong, but Arthur was fueled by 7 years of suppressed rage and the desperate need to get back to his daughter. He found an opening, delivering a series of short, brutal palm-heel strikes to the man's chin and throat. The man staggered back, gasping for air, and Arthur swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. Arthur was on him in an instant, the letter opener now at the man's throat. The fight was over. Suddenly, the wail of police sirens echoed in the distance. The crash had been too loud to go unnoticed. "We have to go," Olivia said, appearing at his side. Her face was smudged with dirt, but her eyes were bright with adrenaline. Arthur looked down at the subdued hunter. There was no time to take him, no time for questions. As he stood, his foot kicked the rifle the man had dropped. Next to it lay something else, a black, rugged satellite phone. Olivia saw it too. While Arthur quickly used his remaining zip ties on the hunter, she snatched the phone from the ground. "Come on," she urged, pulling at his good arm. They ran, disappearing back into the maze of shadows just as the first flashing blue and red lights appeared at the entrance to the shipyard. They were bruised, bleeding, and exhausted, but they were alive. They slowed to a walk a few blocks away, melting into the pre-dawn gloom of the city. Olivia held up the satellite phone, its screen glowing in the darkness. "It's Petrov's," she said, her voice breathless. "If we can get into this, we can find him." The pre-dawn light was beginning to bleed into the eastern sky as they found refuge in the sterile anonymity of a 24-hour diner. The cheerful clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation felt like it belonged to another universe. Arthur slumped into a booth, the adrenaline from the fight draining away, leaving behind a throbbing, searing pain in his forearm. "Let me see that," Olivia said, her voice soft but firm. She slid into the booth opposite him. Ignoring his protest, she gently took his arm. The cut was deep, still oozing blood onto the sleeve of his tattered uniform. While Arthur kept watch over the diner's entrance, Olivia returned from the restroom with a cheap first aid kit and a handful of wet paper towels. She worked with a focused intensity, cleaning the wound with antiseptic wipes that made him hiss in pain, then expertly applying butterfly bandages to close the gash before wrapping it tightly with gauze. He watched her, this powerful CEO, humbled and focused on this small, intimate act of care. For the first time, he let his guard down completely, allowing himself to be taken care of. "It needs stitches," she said, her work finished. "But this will hold for now." "Thank you," he said, the words feeling inadequate. While he recovered, Olivia turned her attention to their prize, the satellite phone. It was locked with military-grade encryption. "I can't break this," she said, "but I know who can." She made the call. "Zane, I have Petrov's sat phone. I'm transmitting the device ID to you now. I need everything on it. Call logs, text messages, GPS history. I need his ghost." "It will take time, Miss Harrington," Zane's voice replied. "But if he's used it, I'll find him." The wait was agonizing. They ordered coffee they didn't drink, the silence between them filled with the unspoken events of the night. "After this is over," Olivia began, breaking the silence, "what will you do?" Arthur stared into his coffee cup. "Take Maya somewhere far away. Change our names again. Disappear again." "You can't live your whole life running," she said softly. "You're not a ghost, Arthur. You're a hero. You saved my life. Evan saved my father's life. You've spent 7 years honoring him. It's time to let someone honor you." He looked up at her, and in her tired, determined eyes, he saw a future he had never dared to imagine, one free of shadows. The tablet on the table buzzed, and Zane's voice came through, sharp and urgent. "I'm in. I have him. Gregor Petrov. He's at the Lansdowne private airfield, 20 miles east of the city. He's not running. He's getting paid. There's a Gulfstream jet on the tarmac. Flight plan filed for Caracas. Scheduled to depart in 90 minutes. And, Ms. Harrington, the charter company that owns the jet is a shell corporation. I traced its funding back to the source. It's owned by Barrett Winslow. It was the final piece, the undeniable link, the smoking gun." "They're tying up loose ends," Arthur realized aloud. "Winslow is paying Petrov to disappear forever." "Then we have to stop them," Olivia said, her eyes flashing. She was already dialing. "This isn't just about force. It's about dismantling his entire world." Her first call was to a contact at the FAA. Her voice was pure steel. "This is Olivia Harrington. I'm invoking the emergency protocol on my father's charter security account. I have a credible, anonymous tip from a source inside Winslow's organization about a bomb threat on a Gulfstream G650, tail number N91WS, scheduled for departure at Lansdowne Airfield. Grounded." Now her second call was to the city's police commissioner. "Commissioner, it's Olivia Harrington. I'm on my way to Lansdowne Airfield. I have irrefutable digital evidence that Barrett Winslow is at this moment making a payoff to the assassin he hired to kill me. I'm sending the data packet from my head of security to your tactical team right now. I want you to meet me there." As they raced towards the airfield, the rising sun cast long shadows across the highway. This time, Olivia drove. Arthur sat beside her, the wrapped wound on his arm a dull throb, his mind clear and focused on the final confrontation. They arrived to see the scene already in motion. FAA vehicles were blocking the runway, their lights flashing. In a private hangar, they could see 2 figures standing beside a table laden with cases. Winslow and Petrov. Just as Winslow pushed a briefcase across the table, the hangar was flooded with the high beams of approaching tactical police vehicles. Winslow froze, his face a mask of pure shock and disbelief. Petrov reacted instantly, kicking the table over and pulling a handgun. He fired wildly at the approaching police, using the chaos to sprint for a side door. But Arthur was already there. He moved to intercept, a shadow detaching itself from the side of the hangar. It wasn't a fight. It was an ending. Arthur met Petrov's charge, deflecting the gun hand and using the man's own momentum to slam him into the hangar wall. The gun clattered away. Before Petrov could recover, Arthur had him subdued, his arm twisted behind his back in a hold from which there was no escape. He held the struggling assassin pinned against the wall just as the police swarmed in. Barrett Winslow was arrested without a fight, his corporate empire crumbling around him in the flashing red and blue lights. 2 days later, Arthur walked through the doors of the private medical facility. A small figure with flying brown pigtails broke away from a woman in the waiting area and sprinted down the hall. "Daddy!" Maya cried, leaping into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, the simple, profound relief of it all washing over him. Over her shoulder, he saw Olivia watching them, a small, beautiful smile on her face. Maya wriggled out of his embrace and ran to Olivia, handing her a piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing. In the center was a big, fuzzy-maned lion. Beside the lion, standing protectively, was a lioness with a golden crown, and between them, safe and sound, was a little lion cub. 1 year later, under the warm autumn sun, a small group of people gathered in the rooftop garden of the Harrington Industries building. Arthur, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, stood waiting. Zane stood beside him as his best man. Down the makeshift aisle, Maya, as the flower girl, threw rose petals with delighted abandon. And behind her, walking toward him, was Olivia, radiant and smiling. As they said their vows, looking out over the city they had fought for, Arthur Harris was no longer a ghost. He was a husband, a father, and a guardian, finally standing in the light. He had kept his promise to his fallen friend, and in doing so, had found a new life, a new family, and a new promise to keep for the rest of his days. And just like that, another story is over. I always wonder where you all are and what you're doing when you listen to these. If you feel like sharing, drop a comment and let me know. Are you on a long drive, working on something, or just winding down for the night? It's nice to picture the story finding a home with you, wherever you are. If you'd like more stories like this one to keep you company on your journey, you know what to do. Hitting subscribe and that little bell means you'll always have another one waiting for you when you need it. A simple like helps others find a companion in these tales too. Thanks for letting me share this space and time with you. It really is a privilege. Until the next one, stay safe out there.